You're listening to the Story Now podcast, and today we're talking with Josh Krueger.
A little gratitude will make your garden grow. A little gratitude is good for your soul.
As always, I am joined by our producer, James Roth. James, welcome.
Hello. Hey, what are you going to do that one time that I'm not here? Because you always say, as always, there's going to be some time that I just don't show up.
I think honestly,
and then it's going to be a lie.
I think honestly at this point, what I'm going to do is just recycle old audio. As always, we have our producer, James Roth.
Hi, I'm generically here. Yeah. You better not reuse this audio.
Yeah, exactly. We just wanted to take a second and thank you for tuning into the podcast. This has been sort of a dream project that we've had for a while now, and to actually be able to implement it and record some of these conversations that we typically have behind the scenes with business owners, and to be able to share that with you, and for there to be actual genuine interest in this has been very, very fun for us. So today's guest is Josh Krueger, owner of Dotcom Design. And I have had the privilege of working with Josh for the last 2 years. He owns a website company, and Storyline is the company that comes in and does the photo video elements of those websites and makes it more of a personalized experience. So we're very thankful to know Josh. We're very thankful to call him a friend. So today we talk about a lot of things. What were some of the things that stuck out to you, James, in our conversation?
Yeah, so the thing that sticks out the most to me was you have a conversation about niching down, or being really specific in what services your business chooses to offer. That really stood out to me because that's actually something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. With the internet, now more than ever, you can do whatever you want to. You can get really specific about what you want to do to make money. So like in the past, you had to be really general with what services you offer. But now if you're like an artist and you want to specialize and you want to say, hey, I only paint pictures of people's cats, and they have to be orange cats. Like you could get just ridiculously specific in what market you're going to serve. Yeah. Because the pool of potential customers is huge. And I think that's really cool, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a fun little thing to hear about, because I think we talk about that all of the time in the services that we offer in the photo video realm of, okay, let's not do weddings anymore. Let's focus in on the small business, corporate, right, that kind of thing. So, well, without further ado, here's our conversation with Josh Krueger. Well, just to start off, I'm looking at these business cards on your desk, Josh, and it says the local web company.
Yeah.
So you got to explain this to me, because you started to tell me, and then I'm like, we got to record.
Yeah.
But you started to tell me a little bit about sort of the history of .com and how you started. So can you just take us through that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I tell everybody, I'll start by saying I'm a business owner, not necessarily an operator, right?
Okay.
And the second piece, I guess, that you should know about me is I'm a sales guy. So my background is in sales. And I've always just been sort of, I guess, maybe a visionary, if you will. So kind of an ideas guy. And I think at some point I was always going to end up an entrepreneur. But again, I'll take you all the way back. So all the way back, I was in college and got an internship, and I was actually selling medical equipment. So I was selling like defibrillators and first aid supplies.
Okay.
Tough gig.
Yeah.
Selling that to like churches and nonprofits.
Sure.
it was tough, but internship kind of came to a close, and it was actually at a small startup, and the small startup was unable to get around to funding. So they basically just said like, hey, we're going to have to, unfortunately, part ways. And so the current CFO of that company was brothers with the president of another like big box marketing agency in Cedar Rapids. And he basically just called him and said, hey, you need to hire this guy. So I went over there and basically just started selling. And I loved sales, still love sales to this day. So got sort of my toes wet with in the website digital marketing space. I guess I should pause there. When I first went over there, we were, I guess this is, geez, I'm dating myself a little bit. We were it was the phone book business. So we were selling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was selling print advertisement in the 2000s. So we call it that's the real school of hard knocks, is trying to sell phone book ads in the 2000s. So I cut my teeth on that. I mean, I literally had a guy drop a stack of leads on my desk and he said, here you go, like feed your family. So
wow.
I end up basically throughout this whole process, end up dropping out of college. I realized very quickly that I was making way more money in sales than any of my friends with degrees, and I just absolutely hated college. So I was looking for a reason to be done doing that. Mm-hmm. So cut my teeth again, phone book, company transition to like websites, digital marketing. So I, again, always just kind of been a student of that, loved that. And then just, again, the entrepreneur in me was like, hey, we can do this bigger, better, faster. We can provide better service, right? I want to have bigger, deeper, more meaningful relationships with the people I'm working with. So I started the local web company. That's yeah. Awesome. I mean, when at this time, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, there's kind of been this evolution in the online world where part of the algorithm that Google used historically, there was a way to sort of like shortcut placement on like the first page of Google based on, like, you can put keywords in your business name. Mm-hmm. Like you saw that a lot with a lot of companies. There's a lot of these that still exist today. And a lot of the thought process was like, hey, if I, put this particular service in my business name, like something that's commonly searched, right? If that can be my company name, I could have an organic presence online and maybe generate some leads. So I showcased my world-class branding skills by coming up with that name and that logo, and quickly realized that didn't maybe have the big box feel that I wanted it to have. Okay. So we changed the name, changed the logo.
How far into the business was that?
Not super far. We were maybe 6 to 8 months down the road.
Gotcha.
So, so yeah, it wasn't that name for a super long stretch of time. But
how many people were in the company?
I was you. Yep. I was running solo at that time. Yep. Okay. So I was basically wearing all hats,
Gotcha.
So, and then, quickly after we transitioned into Dotcom Design, that's when we sort of began the hiring process. So I've always been a big believer of like just living in your superpowers, right?
Sure.
Like trying to figure out like, okay, where are you good and how can you spend more time there? Mm-hmm. And I guess I also think that most business owners are also the company's best salespeople. And if you're not, then obviously you need somebody in sales like sooner rather than later, right?
Sure.
Because I personally think that a company's growth, like that can't happen. You can't grow if you don't have somebody who's actively selling for you, right?
Sure.
And so for me, obviously that was an organic fit to just slide into sales and for me to begin just sort of building a team around me, right? People who could do the things that like I could do, but I knew if I spent time on those things, I knew it slowed down the revenue generation or revenue creation part of the company where I was most needed. So
yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that fascinates me, and we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but you almost hear other business owners talk about things and you're like, that doesn't make sense. And then at some point you get to that point in your own company, you're like, oh, that makes sense. So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is just, we have one employee now who does a lot of the video editing and sort of finishes up the projects while I go out and am the face of the company. And then I usually film the projects. So I'm finding myself doing less than I thought I would at this point. And so I'm just curious about how that happened for you. Obviously at some point you just weren't building websites. Can you talk me through that process? And I guess my main question that I'm trying to get at is, was it hard for you to let go of certain things?
I think it's hard for everybody, right? Because there's this image, right? Or you have this brand that sort of becomes your baby, and you care, right? There's this element of care that we all have in us as humans in terms of like how the world is going to perceive us, right? We think that the brand or the perception of the brand is somehow a reflection of self, right? And I think that's valid. But I do think that the quicker we are to let go and begin to build a team, we learn fairly quickly that we actually can put people in seats who do those things better than we do them. Like the work that we produce today is 10x from what it was when we were the local web company. And it's just because we got the right people in the right seats. And so I think the concern is valid, but I do think, I think just get started. And I think people realize pretty quickly with each key hire you make, your only regret is, I wish I would have done that sooner.
Sure. Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
So,
no. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think as you move through that hiring process too, it's really figuring out, where do you as business owner add the most value, right? And I think a lot of this goes back to like, even, if I go step back a few steps, it's like, what do you actually want? Like I think a lot of people maybe start their own company for different reasons, right? And I think that's okay. But for Miranda and I, it was more about freedom, right? Like we wanted to have time, right, to spend with our kids, or time to vacation, or time to, like, we didn't want to just leave a job to then just like go to another job, right? Like I think a lot of business owners fall into that trap of like, they forget about the main reason they started their company. And I think there are a lot of hard decisions that have to be made, and there are things that are going to be sacrificial along the way. And so I just had to decide, we had to decide that like there was this greater goal that we had, and that was more important to us than like what we thought people thought about us, right? So if we had like an employee who maybe misrepresented the brand, which we can obviously talk about how we can make sure that doesn't happen, but if that happened, we were okay with the risk of that because we had this like greater goal that we were pursuing. Yeah. And so I think a lot of this is like just knowing what that is. Like Miranda and I talk about our priorities here in the house all the time. Like we've established like these are our top four priorities, and we run all of our decisions through that. That's kind of the filter, is like, hey, we're going to do this thing inside of the company. Okay. Does that align with the priorities that we have? Sure. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
no, it is. And I think one of the things that's interesting, and again, one of the things that we were kind of talking about before, is you learn how to say no to certain things. And so you're talking more about, the personal side, like I don't want this to bleed into family time or things like that. But then also sort of focusing on the right clients. And do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of, where you guys started in terms of like clients that you were going after versus maybe where you're now at? And because you're in 5 years in, right?
6 technically.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're 6 years in. Yeah. So I'm just curious about sort of that evolution.
Yeah, I think, and I think this plugs right into what we were just talking about, which is like, how do we begin to build a team? And I think the greatest gift that we can give our team is clarity and focus, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it becomes really easy to build a team once you have a super clear vision of like where you're going, right? Mm-hmm. And not necessarily even where you're going, but how you're going to get there, right? So you understand, like we talked about, which is like, who are we saying no to, right? Who are we, like, what opportunities are we going to say yes to? And like, who can we, like, who are we a good fit for?
Yeah.
And who can we add value to? That's been big for us is as we look at who we're going to serve, right? The clients we're going to work with, the people we're going to say yes to or no to. We've been able to look back and say, okay, over the course of, I guess it's been 6 years, but technically it's been 3 since 2018. January 2018 is when we officially launched.
Okay.
We've asked the question, like, where have we added the greatest value, right? Like, because again, we go into a lot of these conversations, asking that question internally, but also voicing that to the clients is like, hey, just so you know up front, we won't work together if we, A, don't think we're a good fit, and B, we don't think we can add value. So to, I guess, answer your question, as we're looking at like who we're going to say no to and who we're going to say yes to, it honestly, a lot of it had to do with like, where have we added value historically? You know, like which clients have been a good fit.
Sure.
A good fit for us, but also a good fit for them.
Yeah.
So did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of the things that so I'll give you a little bit of a backstory before I get into this next question. One of the things that I was thinking about this morning actually is that we started collaborating. Our first, you and I first had our meeting in December of 2019. So it's 2 years that we've been working together, which where has the time gone? But one of the things that's always been fun for me was I feel like you're a little bit ahead or a lot ahead of where we're at. So it's so fun to like ask you questions of like, hey, I have this, what would you do? You know, cause you've gone through that kind of thing. And so, I'm just curious as to, you know, one of the things that really stuck out to me in the beginning was that you really emphasize good customer service. And so I'm wondering, because I think when you're small, it's easy to do that. And then as you scale, it's a little bit maybe more challenging because you take on more clients. And so you might not have as much time. What have you done because every client I work with that the connections made through .com, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you know, the communication's so great. You know, I fell behind, but they call me every Monday morning to, you know, like check in and see where things are at. So I'm just curious, how do you keep the local customer service, that kind of feel as you grow and get bigger?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I also kind of been reflecting on this, and there's 3 things I think that are important. Well, there's technically 4. The first thing is, I would say it all obviously starts with hiring great people, right? I think the team that you build is important, and understanding who you're putting on the front lines, right? So, you know, like the salespeople we have are super gifted when it comes to relationship. We've cared less about technical ability, like sales skill and ability, and we've cared more about like, are our customers going to like you? Very simple, right? And I think you'll learn as we move through this conversation that a lot of these concepts are incredibly simple. So if you're looking for some like profound wisdom nugget, you probably won't get it. I'm going to drag you back to the simplicity of what I believe sort of is foundational. So, so that's the first thing. Obviously, if you hire great people, you just, in my opinion, you can't lose.
Sure.
But I do think in terms of like what we coach and what we teach, there's 3 things. So the first thing we talk about, again, like I mentioned earlier, is fit and value. So this can be challenging because it's counterintuitive for a salesperson, right? Most salespeople go into every conversation coin operated saying, hey, I have money on the line with this potential relationship, right? But we continue to coach and teach and say fit and value are paramount, right? Like if you do not think we're going to be a good fit and you do not think we're going to add value, please walk away from that person. Like don't even start that engagement. I think a lot of relationships, a lot of like client relationships are a loss on day one. Like I think most of the time, if we're being honest with ourselves, we know from the get-go if this person we're talking to or working with is going to be a good fit or not.
Sure.
And there's a lot of times, like as business owners, we say yes to that stuff out of fear, right? We're like, because you don't know where your next dollar can come from always, right? And so you're sort of grasping at those opportunities. So the first one is fit and value. So we talk about that often. I think the other, like probably the largest item boils down to expectations. So I'm a firm believer that all relationships and the outcome of those relationships hinges on expectations. And so we talk about expectations and then we talk about expectations again, and then we talk about it again. So every conversation we have, or at least this is what we're coaching, this is what we aspire to do, is to make sure we're crystal clear on expectations, right? There's this discontentment gap you've maybe heard people talk about, right? Where there's reality and then there's expectations, and sort of everything in between that is discontentment. And I heard someone say that a while back and it hasn't left me. And so we take that really seriously. Like anytime we talk with a customer, we ask them like, what is your expectation? And then we tell them like, this is reality, right? What we're trying to do is get their expectation and reality to have alignment.
Yeah.
Because if those two things align, there is no discontentment and you have very fruitful, sustainable, long-term relationships. And so you can't just like having that conversation about expectations can be uncomfortable, but I think the better you get at having that conversation, I think you'll find you'll have more fruitful relationships, not just in business, but gosh, this is key for your marriage and with your kids and with friends. I just think this conversation about expectations is huge. So we coach on that a lot. And then the final piece is just, we talk about being proactive and not being reactionary. So I think a lot of conversations come to us. And I think if we were just better planners and more proactive, we begin to know what obstacles or problems are going to maybe surface. We also know what like feelings our customers could potentially have, right? What fears may manifest. And it's simple. It's get out ahead of those things, right? It's like people just need to hear from you that this is normal, right? Like, hey, here's the process, right? And we establish expectations. But we also are like proactive, like be proactive in your communication, right? If you have a delay in a project, don't wait for the customer to come ask you, why is my project 2 weeks late? No, go tell them, hey, we have this problem. Here's how we plan to resolve it. You know, be a human and apologize and move forward. So again, I think it's hire good people. Don't have a fear of missed opportunities, but live boldly in this idea of fit and value. Like expectations all day long, and then just be proactive, not reactionary. So.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's great wisdom in that, because I think, especially for creative people, because I think it's hard to, kind of like get creative people to do that kind of thing. And I'm saying that as one, right? And that's one of the things that we had to learn early on, and we're still learning. So even just, what you're saying about expectations, hearing you say that makes me want to sort of reevaluate, those initial conversations that we have in the future. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, we also are in the creative world, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to make this doesn't have to be some super serious thing, but I do think every relationship should start. Like we even have this document. It's not into the workflow just yet. It's something we've been working on over time, but it's an expectations document.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we tell people like, hey, in the design process, this is a creative thing, right? And we make fun of it, and we're like, hey, we can't wave a magic wand, right?
Sure.
We're being asked to be a mind reader, but coincidentally, we don't have a magic ball that we can shake and look into.
Sure.
So be patient. Like, here's the process. Here's how you could potentially feel at some point in the process. That's normal, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and I'm assuming that you find too, there are some clients out there that don't know what they want until they see what they don't want.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you try to hammer all that out in the expectations conversation, or what happens when?
Most definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. The specifics on that would be like you said, we tell people up front, it's almost impossible for us to do this.
Sure.
If you don't even know what you want. We can try. And obviously I know we're getting into the weeds, but for us, it's like, here's the process. And we tell people like, you have the freedom to not know, but if you don't know, like, you're paying for that, not us.
Sure.
Like, we'll take you through our framework, but
yeah.
And you have permission. We're going to try this a couple of times. And if like, we want you to give us very clear feedback, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it's, we do mood boards, and we do obviously as much stuff as we can to try and get insight on what they're thinking. But yeah.
And those custom media packages really help too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. That's awesome. So we've been working together for the last 2 years. I'll go out and do the custom media packages that sort of take the website to a more personalized level. One of the things that I don't even know that I've told you this, but there was a .com sort of like company meeting over Zoom that I was a part of. And that was right during the beginning of the pandemic. And at the time, you were CEO. And one of the things that I was really just admired a lot was your leadership and just how calm you were. Because a lot of people were freaking out. Are we going to, there's all this stuff of like businesses shutting down, things like that. And I remember you being on there saying, guys, we're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen any, changes that much. What was going through your mind in that? Like, I was just so blown away with how calm you were, how comforting you were. I felt better. I'm not even technically, part of the company. And so I was just curious about what was going on in your mind during that time frame. And then sort of how did .com sort of navigate through COVID? I think it was probably, I don't want to say easier, but maybe, you have employees all over the country. So you were already sort of had employees working from home. So I'm just curious about sort of that time period and of the company. Man,
COVID definitely had an impact on us. Like you'd think from a website digital marketing perspective that it would be, we obviously saw a huge shift, right? Like a lot of people quickly learned we've got to have some sort of a digital footprint. But with the industries we primarily service, being the trades industries, those people felt this in a fairly significant way. And so we did have, a fairly good dip in like our recurring revenue, and, we had projects kind of slow down, and it has been challenging. Like we've got people in, we're probably in 8 to 10 different countries. And so the protocols in these places and all these countries are different, right? Like the Philippines, for example, like they put people in facilities who have COVID, right? They like stick them in these like buildings and they like isolate them.
Okay.
That's new to me, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how are we gonna care for someone like that in that situation?
Sure.
So we were forced to just, like everybody, very quickly just pivot. But I think what's nice about this, and I think this is maybe why you saw this like calm demeanor. Obviously, there's still stress and stuff, right? Like by no means was I like this flawless human through this, but it all goes back to like, who are we at our core? Not only who are we at our core, but like, what are the things we want to do, right? So we talked about like, okay, how do we hire a CEO, right? How do we hire someone to run our company and step back from that? Well, what are the core things you're trying to do, right? So when we think about COVID and we think about Dotcom Design and how are we going to respond to this big crisis that's happening, right? This global pandemic. Who am I at my core, right? Who am I at my foundation? And for me, anytime I'm in a tough situation, I think you have to go back to your core. You have to go back to these like primitive roots and go back to this like foundational wiring. And so for me, honestly, and this obviously doesn't come out super easy, but I asked myself the question, what happens if Dotcom Design collapses in this pandemic? We lose all of our employees, we lose all of our customers, and this thing goes completely bankrupt. Then what? I'll still live.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really simple stuff, but like, I'll still live, right? I'll still have my wife and I'll still have my kids, and maybe we'll lose our house, but we'll still be together. I'll still have a relationship with the creator of this universe. And so I think if, like, for me in these high stress moments, in these, big decisions, it all just goes back to that foundational wiring.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think, like, the work that we put in daily, like the most important work we put in daily is on that foundational wiring.
Yeah.
Like there are all these little practical things you can do to move the needle, whether it be hiring or branding or videos or a new website or PR or sales. Like none of that stuff has, A, it doesn't have eternal value, but B, it also doesn't help you with like big thought process. And so to me, the big thought process work happens in this foundational wiring. So I think everybody should be setting time aside daily. Like I started this, there's this journal. I almost got it out of my closet. It's in my closet because I've converted it to digital, to be clear, but it's it's called The Most Important Hour.
Okay.
And it's a journal in the morning that basically there's a series of questions, just like some introspection type things, like some foundational wiring type things that are in this journal. There's obviously like an element of reading scripture and, affirmations and daily gratitude. And I mean, there's some things like that, but for me, that like that foundational wiring work is important. And I think when I'm shaky in my decision making, or I'm finding myself more stressed, or I find myself in we just had this really hard conversation yesterday as a team. We've got this really massive client and this really massive project, and a lot of things are not going well. And it'd be easy to show up to that meeting freaking out. Like we're talking 60, 70 grand for a project. And we have this hard deadline, and it's like, hey, you got to go hit this thing or else. And we don't know what the or else is. So it's like, okay, I could show up to that meeting and be like, hey guys, we got, freak out and like, we got to fix all this stuff, figure it out. Or I can show up and say, guys, what's the worst case scenario here? We lose the client, we refund them their money, and we move on. Like, we'll be fine. And I wouldn't be able to do that though if I wasn't putting in that work daily on that foundational wiring. And so for me, it's like I can tell when I'm not taking care of the foundation.
Interesting.
It shows up, man.
Yeah.
It shows up every single time. And so I think that's been, as I've matured and as I've been a business owner, I find myself in a better place when I have a solid foundation and I have a clear understanding of like the purpose of this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the purpose of this thing? It goes back to expectations. Like we even have these we have these internal expectations as well.
Right.
And I just think it's kind of managing that and putting in the work on those things. So
yeah, that was great, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's just so good. I'm like, I don't even have a response because I'm just kind of like internalizing that because I've been thinking about that for a long time, of like, okay, because there's been nights where I can't sleep because I'm thinking about projects, and then going back to this whole thing of like, okay, what is the worst case scenario? Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe I don't talk about that, like thinking about the worst case scenario, because I don't want it to come across as like I'm going to be negligent, right?
Totally.
Yeah, but
sure.
It helps you kind of get your footing and go, okay, now let's figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So that's awesome.
We even talk about this with like our business development reps, like they're on the sales side. We call it the core attitude. And I think everybody in every position should have a core attitude. So like as a business owner, and you have to be careful because this could definitely sound arrogant. You have to say this with the spirit of humility, and the disclaimer up front is like, I say this in love.
Sure.
I say this with humility, but the reality is these people we work with, they need us more than we need them.
Sure.
And that I think is true for anybody you work with. Like,
Yeah.
as you build your company, there's never going to be a client who defines you.
Mm-hmm.
Like there just won't be. They're not going to like create your success or be a part of creating failure. Like
Sure.
they could create some obstacles and some stressors in your life, but I think it's just important to be able to like pull back.
Yeah.
You know? And as like just somebody who's even just hitting the phones, like what's your attitude? And it's like, okay, I haven't scheduled an appointment in a week. I'm stressed. This sucks. Okay. Like let's revisit your foundational wiring, you know, like
yeah.
what's that core truth? Like, what are you telling yourself? Right. And a piece of that would be like, hey, this person needs me more than I need them. That'll make sure you don't start to sound desperate, and it'll make sure you don't start to like live in a way outwardly that's like negative when you're around your family or friends. Like this
Sure.
stuff can start to show up in other places. So
Yeah. 100%.
yeah.
How does it work with inside the company? I know that recently you guys have kind of shifted around roles and stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of like, you know, finding the right person to lead the teams and things like that?
So your question would be,
Well, I'm just curious, like, because before we started talking, you were talking about how great it is to have Jonathan in the role he's in now as CEO. So I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about, because he wasn't always in that role.
Right.
So how do you have those kind of internal conversations where you think like, you know, oh, maybe this person would be better in this role.
Sure. Yeah.
How do you not hurt people's feelings?
Right.
You know, because I think that that's one of the challenges of being a small business is you didn't, and maybe any business, you don't necessarily nail it right away, but it's something that evolves. And so I'm just curious about how do you be open, you know, with other people in leadership about shifting that? What does that look like?
Yeah. That's obviously a very complex question. I think this, again, I'll keep it really simple for you because that's just how I roll. It all goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is what do you want, right? Like most of us create a business for a couple of reasons, right? We want time, we want money, we maybe want to make an impact, right? And there can be a combination of those three things. But when we think about our superpowers, we think about like, where do we add value in terms of the company? I think most people fall into this trap of like, it's just fun to have the CEO title, right? Like it's fun to be the boss. And they kind of like that. And if you like that more than you like time or you like money or you like these other things that you like set out, right? Like people needs change. I think like they go from like, hey, I'm going to start this company to like get time or money back on my side. And then they get a taste of like, oh, I'm the boss. And it's hard for them to relinquish that, right? It's hard for them to say, I don't know if I necessarily add the most value in this seat. Like there's somebody A on my team who I think's better for that, or B, I can go find somebody who I think does that better than me, right? And you don't always have to have a CEO to live in your superpower, right? Like you can build a collaborative unit around you who begins to own more like some of these operational things. But I guess I challenge people to ask themselves when they get to that point, like, are you just doing this for the title, or like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? You know, like, what do you really want this business to do for you? And I think if you're solid in what you want this business to actually do for you, it gets pretty easy to now begin trying to build a team around those objectives.
Sure.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And I'm kind of fascinated by this whole thing of like learning what other people's strengths are. I mean, do you guys, I know you do monthly, well, I think it's actually maybe more regular than that, but you guys do meetings and all the time. And so I'm just curious, like, do you do any sort of like personality tests or like?
We do.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think, so I'll answer that a couple ways. So yes, we do. So shameless plug for Erica Olaf. She obviously takes our team through, it's a strengths-based test called Gallup.
Okay.
Strength Finders. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
so we obviously have gone through that in a very like formal, more practical, meaningful way. But I like to keep it simple. I don't think somebody has to go do a personality test to know what their superpowers are. Like,
Sure.
it's pretty obvious to most people as they sit back and they say, okay, what am I good at?
Yeah.
Like the hard part of this is being able to be humble enough to say, like, I'll be honest, it's awkward to own this company. And like, Jonathan's my boss.
Sure.
Like, I have a boss. And,
Yeah.
and it's not, this is something I take pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Because I truly believe that, like, you have to get to this spot. Like, he's the leader, right? Like, we're going to submit to his leadership.
Sure.
And that can be incredibly challenging for a lot of people. So that's kind of the first step. And then, so to answer your question, it's like, what am I good at? Well, I'm good at sales. So I should probably stay in sales. Because we saw, honestly, there was a period, and we're kind of like breaking back out of this, but there was a period where I kind of disappeared into the CEO role, right? Lots of shiny objects, big visionary, lots of new ideas, lots of new products, like always changing. About sunk the ship, to be honest.
Okay.
And it wasn't until we made this big move where we got a guy in the seat who's like, no, we're going to start saying no to this and no to this and no to this and no to this, and like really installed this really clear focus back in the company. And again, it took me saying, hey, I'm going to go just sit in this seat and make sure that like revenue is being produced. Like,
Sure.
I think that often gets forgotten about when people talk about teams, right? Like, I don't know. I get so tired of people thinking it's like, it's sexy to brag about how many employees you have, right? Like,
Sure.
like that has become this like the new awkward conversation. Like, people are like, well, I got a couple employees. Like, you know, it's like they say that, like, they should say that confidently. Like,
Yeah.
maybe you're running a really lean organization.
I'm wondering what was the moment where you decided like something needs to change here? What was that like?
Yeah. That's a hard question. That's a really hard question.
Well, because I mean, I think the thing that I admire the most is that you even got to the point where you could say, I think this would be better if this person was in place. Because I know, just even as I let go of responsibilities and other people on our team, you know, take that, there's still things that I don't want to let go of yet. And so, you know, saying, hey, this role needs to change, that I just admire that, you know, you want the success of the company more than maybe the shiny title, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's a great thought. And so, yeah, so that's what I was talking about, where it was like being in pursuit of the wrong things, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can sometimes, I think, be blinded by the opinions around us.
Sure.
Right. Or this vibe we want to put off, right?
Yeah.
Like, man, what are people going to think if I go on LinkedIn and change my title and I'm not CEO anymore? Oh gosh, what are they going to think? But again, I think you just have to be grounded in like, what do you want this business to actually do?
Yeah.
I know you asked me something slightly different to start that question. I think it was how do these shuffles begin to happen, and how do these moves begin to
and how do you, is there kind of like a universal understanding that, hey, we can have honest conversations here about what's working and what's not?
Yeah. And again, for me, I think I just have always had, well, it's no secret. Like, I love Dotcom Design, but I'm a business owner, right? Like, I'm a company guy. I don't want to just be in that business. Like, I don't want to have a full-time job forever.
Sure.
And so maybe some people want to do that. But for me, I care more about the well-being of that company than I care about like a title or the opinion of somebody else. And that can be hard to overcome, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, just the thing that you were kind of saying about comparing yourself to others, do you have difficulty with that? Because I know that I hear about other people's businesses or like what other people are making, and then I get really jealous. And then there's moments where I have to kind of dial it back and go, okay, wait. This is working for me. I get amazing quality time with my family. And so I have to sort of like remind myself of like, okay, what you were saying earlier of like, what are your goals? You know? So I was just a little curious about what do you do to kind of pull yourself out of the maybe competitive state if you get to that point?
Yeah. Well, can I go spiritual on you?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. I think so there's really been, and I maybe should have went here earlier because I think this kind of ties this all together. I think the first thing I realize is that Jonathan's not the actual CEO of Dotcom Design. It's the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think when I understand that, I've got a guy who is running my company in flesh who submits to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's big for me. Right?
Yeah.
But I'm really grounded in the fact that like God runs Dotcom Design. Like he's the true CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's the first thing that sets me free from that. The second piece of this for me, and I know I talked to you about redecorating my office and stuff. I'm actually really close to changing this wallpaper behind me to just have the one big word on it. And it would say abide.
Okay.
Abide has just kind of been like my resolution. It would be my New Year's resolution, I guess, if you will. But I think I'll take it further than that, which is I'm realizing and learning that abiding in Christ is the secret sauce.
Mm-hmm.
It's the secret sauce for everything. Because as I abide, I realize that these other fleshly desires just die,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and again, I'll still always exist in flesh, but I don't care about the opinion of man as I abide.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we all fight that. We all fight the like, man, they're making what? And
Right.
There's definitely an element of like, we'll always forever be trying to combat that.
Yeah.
But I do think like if you're looking for really like the really practical pieces, for me, it's just like I have to start my day by abiding.
Mm-hmm.
And as I move through my day, I have to abide.
Yeah.
And I feel like as I'm living this more like Christocentric life, where he's not just in, church, or he's not just in my morning time, but he lives in sort of everything I do as I move throughout my day.
Yeah.
I find it easier to not be concerned with those things, but to just focus on like what I think my purpose and calling and reason for existence actually is.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's good. And it kind of just, I like that sort of mantra of living in it, because I think a lot of times you set aside 15 minutes or whatever, or you go to church on Sunday, but then you don't carry that. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah.
So sort of looking to the future, where do you see .com, within maybe the next 5 years?
So I guess I won't try to forecast where we'll maybe specifically be, but I think some of the stuff we've talked about in terms of like, what have we learned, and what are the things we're going to double down on, right? So the things we're going to double down on, this idea of a narrow focus. So I think our list of things we say no to is going to continue to grow, and the things we're saying yes to is going to continue to shrink. We've gone from saying yes to, just about every industry to one, right? Mm-hmm. We've gone from 3 or 4 website products to 1. We've gone from a dozen marketing products to 3. So my hope would be that we take the 4 things we're doing now over the next 5 years, and maybe that becomes 1.
Okay.
I really feel like the world we live in today allows companies to niche, and I feel like as you niche down, like there's margin in that in that move. So I think the second thing, which I already kind of touched on, is just a very specific product, like a very specific offering to a very specific person. And what's funny, and you will never be able to, what's really funny is nobody will ever subscribe to this thought until they've done it.
Sure.
We can, like, someone could tell us right now, just start saying no to a whole bunch of stuff and just say yes. But there is a process, right? Like as you start your company, you do feel like, hey, I've got to say yes to some of the stuff to pay the bills. But I actually think that's not true.
Okay.
I think you can start a company with a really very small list of things you're saying yes to, and you'll be okay today. Like actually, Jonathan just sent this there was this quote he uploaded that I think you'll actually really appreciate. So there's this journalist and author, Derek Thompson, and he talked about how to succeed as a writer in the modern world. And the interviewer asked him, he said, "What advice do you give to a recent college grad who comes to you and says, 'I'm interested in journalism and writing books'?" And Thompson responded, he said, "There is a paradox to scale, I think. People who want to be big sometimes think, I have to immediately reach the largest possible audience. But in a weird way, the best way to produce things that take off is to produce small things, to become a small expert, to become the best person on the internet at understanding the application of Medicaid to minority children or something like that." And then he goes on to say the reason why he thinks like this is he looks at Tokyo as an example. He said, if you go to Tokyo, you'll see there are all sorts of really, really strange shops. So there'd be a shop that's only like 1970s vinyl, right? Like not a vinyl store, but 1970s vinyl.
Oh, interesting.
Or you'll go to like a whiskey store and it's like 1980s whiskey, like the niche of the niche of the niche, right?
Yeah.
Like 1980s whiskey. And that doesn't make sense if it's a shop in the Des Moines suburb, right? But in a Des Moines suburb to exist, like you have to be like Subway. So you have to hit the mass market immediately.
Right.
But in Tokyo, there's 30 to 40 million people within a train ride of the city. So your market's basically 40 million. So within that 40 million, sure, there's a couple thousand people who love 1970s music or a couple thousand people who like 1980s whiskey. The internet is Tokyo. So the internet allows you to niche at scale.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that. So this guy says like niche at scale is something that young people should aspire to. So like new business owners today, and again, this is more in the application of like those operating in maybe a more of a virtual setting, right? Like if you're local brick and mortar, I think there's still some wisdom that can be gleaned from that, right? You don't have to do video for everybody, right? Like, you can pick, hey, I'm going to do business or, like this one particular industry. Again, we've kind of broken out of this all things for all people. And we're headed towards one thing for one person. Yeah. And I just feel like if you look around, there are a lot of companies who have, well, you look even at Amazon, right? Like that company didn't start by being this like this massive organization they did books, right? Yeah. And they did books really, really well. And then obviously they expanded it into other things. But for us at Dotcom Design, it'd just be, I think, narrow focus, very specific product, very specific group of people. And obviously on on a macro level, making an impact, like we really do, like this idea of care is important to us. That sits, I think, right in the center of the hearts of the people running the company, which is we just want to care for our people, right? Like we really do want to see the people inside of our company live better lives because they're a part of the organization. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? How can people find you?
Yeah. So obviously dotcomdesign.com, that can be a little confusing, but the first .com is spelled out. So DOTCOM design.com. I'm not a big social media guy, so I don't have a big social media plug. I could plug my stuff, but you're not going to get much content from me.
So just check out the website.
Yeah, you can check out the website if you want, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again for joining us, and I hope people learned something today. I know that I did. So thanks again.
Awesome. You bet. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Story Now podcast. Before we go, we just wanted to give a special thanks to Justin Goodchild, who wrote and performed the song that you are hearing now.
And please be sure to follow us on all our social media channels, and we'll see you in the next episode.
When you hunger in the tooth, you take your mind off one small truth. No matter what you got, it's never gonna make you whole. Sunday morning, take your rest. Think of all that you've been blessed with. Appreciate